It's the seventh grandchild that President Biden refuses to face, and that makes him a total disgrace. The White House coldly shutting down questions about Hunter's estranged 4-year-old daughter.
There was a story in the New York Times over the weekend about Hunter Biden's daughter in Arkansas. Does the president acknowledge this little girl as his granddaughter?
I don't have anything to share from here.
Cold. That damning New York Times piece reveals how Biden aides are told to flatly ignore Hunter's daughter. Quote, in strategy meetings in recent years, aides have been told that the Bidens have 6 and not 7 grandchildren, according to 2 people familiar with the discussions. I wonder which lying, dog-faced pony soldier they got that from.
The best part of it all, I have 6 grandchildren, and I'm crazy about them. I speak to them every single day. Not a joke. Matter of fact, I just got finished going through the calls, and guess what? They're crazy about me because I pay so much attention to them.
Oof, that is heartbreaking when you hear that contrast. You know, Katie, I've noticed a pattern among the Bidens. You know, that's not my laptop. That's not my gun. That's not my cocaine. That's not my child. Is it any wonder that half the country says that's not my president?
I guess not.
In your face.
It's in your face. First, okay, so the New York Times printed this, so now all of a sudden it's a story. Like, it's been a story for 4 years, and now I'm glad they're being asked about it directly at the White House, but this is something that people have known about, that has been reported on, and it was called a conspiracy theory, and now all of a sudden, after many court cases and being served multiple times, they're having to address it by saying, we're not going to talk about the 7th grandchild. And it's not just Joe Biden who refuses to acknowledge it. Jill Biden, I would say, is just as bad because when she decorates the White House for Christmas, she only hangs 6 stockings, which is just absolutely abhorrent. And it's just not true. When he says he has 6 grandchildren, he doesn't. He has 7 of them. And he ran on being Mr. Empathy, Mr. Family. Clearly, that's not true. But the problem with this for them is that it brings the consequences of Hunter's bad behavior into a reality. And that's what they don't like. They think they can bury the laptop because the media did it for them. They think they cannot talk about Hunter's behavior from the White House podium because he's a private citizen. But when it comes to having an actual human child there, it's very clear that Hunter's behavior has caught up to him. And when you don't want your child to have your last name, it's pretty disgusting.
I can imagine. I mean, I don't know this, but I believe Joe Biden claims that he's pro-life, right? Even though he's, yes.
He's like halvesy. He's like half pregnant.
Yeah. Well, my point being that I'm sure that, you know, he would be happier if that child didn't exist. Certainly acts that way.
I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that this is a moment where the president really could have told his son, enough's enough. Like, I'm happy to deal with all this other stuff. I'll take it about the business dealings, the addiction, the videos, whatever, we can handle this. But this is humanity, right? This is the face of it. And I found the article to be very difficult to read, frankly. And the fact that she knows who she is made it so much worse. You know, because there are a lot of people floating around who don't know who their family is, right? They don't know who their dad is, or they were put up for, or they were left somewhere and they ended up with wonderful people who took care of them. But this is someone who is proud of the fact that her grandfather is the president of the United States and doesn't get acknowledged. And frankly, the American people would care 0% about this, right? Like, they would just say, oh, he has 7 grandkids.
Yeah.
Hunter slept with this woman. And I was trying to figure out throughout the story, like, what's the problem with this family, right? Is there some, the Trump supporters, big deal, you know, big deal. If you're willing to accept someone who was an addict like that and made such terrible choices, like, it's so bad that they vote for the other guy. And I don't think it's something that will change votes necessarily, but it is just an ugliness that doesn't need to be there.
It does feel, Judge, in a way like a class thing. I mean, the fact that, you know, oh, she's the daughter's mother is let's just say a dancer.
But then she was his assistant.
You know, but the mother, it's very interesting. The mother in this case is a college graduate. She played basketball. I think, was it at Arizona State University? I mean, this is a woman who's a very bright woman, and she apparently worked for Hunter's company. And, you know, we're not talking about someone, you know, who is an embarrassment. And look at it this way. Her family can say, you know what, we love America. You know, we don't want to be associated with the Bidens. They're corrupt. They collect money from other countries. The economy's a mess. But they don't. They're desperate to have this child named after the Bidens. What father, what family would be so insistent that this child not have the Biden last name? To me, that's cruel. And when this little girl grows up, and she starts to understand what she may even be beginning to understand now, because she knows her grandfather's the president. She knows who her father is. You know, she's going to have a lot of issues, emotional issues, that the Bidens, who are allegedly a family centered on their family lives around their grandchildren, according to the New York Times, they're not what they want you to believe. And by the way, they not only had 6 stockings for the grandchildren, they had a Christmas stocking for the dog. I mean, these are really classless people, and America understands. America would accept this. They wouldn't just accept it. A lot of families have this problem where there's an extramarital affair and a child is born, an out-of-wedlock child. 2 single people have a child. They don't know about it until 5 months later. There's a lot of this going on. It's not an embarrassment.
Charlie, I think the biggest lie we were told about Biden was that he was an empathizer.
Yes.
But I get the feeling that it was about this deep, that he really could feel your pain, but he won't do anything about it. And this is perfect advice. I mean, perfect example of it.
Yeah, his entire campaign in 2020 was about being empathetic, being decent. He was going to restore normalcy to Washington, and obviously has failed on every front of that. But what's sort of interesting is that he's sort of been bobbing around Washington for so long. Most people in Washington already kind of knew this side of him. They knew that he was a sort of a liar. They knew that he made things up. He would just talk about anything. He would say anything that helped him at any given moment. When he talked about his family, people in Washington also kind of knew that he was less of a family man and more just willing to exploit his family when it served to benefit him. If you remember in 2016, after President Obama decided to support Hillary Clinton, which foreclosed Biden's ability to run in 2016, he blamed his decision to not run on the death of his son.
Right.
And then, of course, he has exploited the biography of his first wife, who died 50 years ago, with his daughter. And in that accident, both of his sons were injured. He's, of course, taken that story and twisted it around to talk about how the driver of the truck was somehow drunk, which is completely false. The accident was caused by when she pulled out in front of a truck driver who was just driving. But that sort of callous, heartless willingness to exploit even your family and then turn around and who's embarrassing here? Yeah. The family or the Bidens, as you point out. But to them, if he sees it as a political advantage, he has no problem doing that.
Can I just say, so I don't think that the American public writ large thinks that about Joe Biden or the Bidens, and we can get into the weeds.
About Washington.
Well, it matters who elects him, right?
It's a lot of cover.
Fine. But this really is a story about a father that will not put limits on their son, right? This is what Hunter Biden said, I don't want this child around. And so his dad said, that's fine.
But he didn't have to put limits on him because they had the Biden name. That's the gross part about it. It's not just the relationship between the dad and the son. It's how they basically use their power to make sure they're impervious to the law. I mean, you think about all the people going through hell because of January 6th. This guy's got the sweetest sweetheart deal. If they find the coke, does he still have that deal? I mean, if they find out that coke's his, does he still have that deal? It's a good question, right?
Anybody else would get blown up for it.
Yeah.
January 6th people did a bad thing. This is not
I'm
like
not saying
they
they didn't. I'm saying that this guy's got a mountain this high of bad things, and he'll keep doing it because there's no disincentives. He can just keep going. I'm jealous.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.